Hello, this is Jumbo Commander, and the Conspiracy 2 hits keep coming. Today we have another Commander deck tech, this time with Grenzo Havoc Raiser. We get yet another very interesting Commander card in Grenzo Havoc Raiser. Red for a 2/2 legendary Goblin Rogue. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, choose one. Goad target creature that player controls, or exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. This guy's really interesting. It still uses a lot of the red's ability to be aggressive. You have to attack with a lot of creatures and deal combat damage to a player, so it still rewards attacking, but it gives you that combat damage benefit of basically being able to draw cards, and not just any cards, cards from your opponent's deck, which makes it very interesting. Also, you can kind of control combat afterwards in a chaotic way by goading your opponent's creatures. Let's take a closer look at Goad. All right, this is copied straight from Wizard's website. Let's learn a little bit more about Goad. Until your next turn, that creature attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. So a few key features. Notice it says attacks a player. So your opponents can't attack planeswalkers to get around this. That's important. Next feature. It says a player other than you first. So in a multiplayer game, they're going to be attacking your opponents first. But if it's a heads-up game, that creature is going to be forced to attack you. Well, that's actually pretty good. We want these creatures attacking and not blocking. Also, there are a few tricks your opponents can use to get out of attacking. If their creature can tap, for example, to create mana or use an activated ability, they can do that before combat, and then their creature can't attack. As always, defenders can't attack. And also, you can't force your opponent to pay any taxes for attacking. Let's say a ghostly prison is in play. You can't force them to pay too. Also, one last thing to remember when goading your opponent's creatures is try to reproduce the exact facial expression that Jeering Homunculus is performing right now. Yeah, look at that face and then try to reproduce that as you make your opponent's creatures attack. All right, the very first thing I want to do is stress the importance of mana ramp in a deck like this. Now, our first inclination is to maybe not put as much mana ramp in a deck like this because we're going to have a lot of low drops. And this deck tech does have a lot of low drops. I mean, we want to flood the board with creatures. We might not need the Thran Dynamos to ramp up to something bigger. But I actually think we do. See, Grenzo only gains card advantage if we can actually cast the spells that we peel off the top of our opponent's library. Now this leads us with a conundrum. Do we want to spend our mana casting creatures to get the Grenzo trigger, or do we want to utilize the Grenzo trigger and get the card advantage from our opponents? I actually think that this provides an interesting balance of playing some creatures, playing some mana ramp, when to goad your opponents, when to try and cast their spells. I think this is going to be a very compelling deck. So what kind of commander is Grenzo shaping up to be? Well, I know I want to goad my opponent's creatures, and I certainly want to cast their spells. So I think I'm going to want a lot of creatures. I'm going to want to make sure to go wide and be able to deal combat damage to players. Well, wide might not be good enough. Maybe I need to go evasive as well. Have creatures with flying or menace or intimidate. Grenzo's a goblin. Maybe we could go goblin tribal. I hear a lot of goblins are really, really powerful. Actually, there are a lot of really powerful goblins, and Krenko Mob Boss is a perfect goblin to go in a Grenzo deck, or to put Grenzo in a Krenko deck. Do you know what? I think the goblin archetype is very powerful, but pretty overdone. I think that there aren't a lot of decisions to be made when picking the most powerful goblins. So I think in this deck tech, I might steer clear of goblins and explore some other options. The first thing I want to do is go wide. I can get a lot of creatures on the battlefield and ping my opponents to death with them. First up, we got Pia and Kira Nalaar. When Chandra's parents enter the battlefield, they build two 1/1 Thopters with flying. It's exactly what we want. Thopters will go wide, and they got flying, so they can get in pretty easily. As long as we're talking Thopters, Thopter Assembly, 6 mana for a 5/5 flyer. But if you've got no Thopters in play, you return it to your hand, put 5 1/1 Thopters with flying onto the battlefield. That's going to create a lot of havoc. If we're going wide, we got to have Purphoros, God of the Forge. 4 mana for an indestructible god, and whenever you have a creature enter the battlefield, it pings each of your opponent for 2 damage. And, just for kicks, it's got a built-in anthem. 2 and a red, your creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. Now, Purphoros might be a little bit too present at your commander table. You might see him a little bit too often. He might be winning too many games. But that's just because he's that powerful. Consider him. Next, we have one of my favorite cards, Tempt with Vengeance. X and a red for a tempting offer. You put X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto the battlefield. Then you go to your opponents, and for each opponent that also takes the tempting offer of X 1/1 red elemental creature tokens, you also get that many. So you're always going to end up with more than your opponents, and if everyone takes the tempting offer, then you will have so many elementals to play with, and then so many Grenzo triggers. The only downside is that if you're sinking all of your mana into this Tempt with Vengeance, you'll have no mana left to cast all of your opponent's spells when you attack them with a bajillion elemental creatures with haste. Krenko Mob Boss. I mentioned him earlier. He belongs at the helm of a deck, and Grenzo belongs in it. He also earned a spot in this deck with Grenzo at the helm, because he's just going to spit out more and more goblins. And to be honest, the more goblins you have, the more powerful Krenko gets. Siege Gang Commander is another powerful goblin that just spits out 3 1/1 red goblin creature tokens onto the battlefield. Another similar effect is Beetleback Chief. Man, there are a lot of spells that just pump goblins onto the battlefield. Well, if we're not going goblin tribal, what are we doing? I just don't think we should be limited by goblins. Let's take a look at another tribe. That's right, let's talk about Eldrazi. This is Emrakul's Hatcher. It's also going to spit 3 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn onto the battlefield. Now you're thinking to yourself, wait a second, 0/1s cannot deal combat damage to your opponents and thus can't get Grenzo's trigger. And you're right, we would need to pump them in some way to get them in for damage. But what Emrakul's Hatcher does do is it gives us the extra mana to be able to cast our opponent's spells. And cards like Rapacious One is great at getting in damage against our opponent. 6 mana for 5/4 Trampler, and when it deals combat damage, you can put that many 0/1 Eldrazi spawns into play. So these Eldrazi help us go wide and help us gain mana. They don't fit exactly into the strategy that I was hoping for. Oh, just wait. I have something amazing. Oblivion Sower. Now, this guy should go in Grenzo at any time, even if you go Goblin Tribal, Oblivion Sower. Remember how important I said mana ramp was? Well, Oblivion Sower is going to do a little bit of that. 6 for a 5/8. When you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library. Then you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. Alright, so you think you might get a few lands, but wait a second. If Grenzo's been on the battlefield for any time at all, you're going to be exiling lots of lands off of your opponent's library over and over again. You're actually going to be exiling tons of lands that you're not going to be able to play. And in most cases, they're going to be misses. You're going to be like, oh man, I exiled another land. I don't get to cast their cool spells. But with Oblivion Sower, you get to reap the benefit of all those exiled lands. Just boom, onto the battlefield under your control. And then suddenly you're a powerhouse with more mana than everyone else. Oh, I can feel the power. What about Blight Herder? We're talking about going wide. This is going to produce 1/1s. 5 mana for a 4/5, and in order to get 3 1/1 Eldrazi Scions that also create mana, all you have to do is put 2 cards from exile into their graveyard. You're going to have tons of cards in exile. There's no way you're going to be able to cast everything. And so for minimal cost, you're going to get tons of power spread across the board with mana ramp. Oh, the Eldrazi are so sweet. Oh, I hope we're not going to talk about Kozilek and Ulamog and how great they are. No, it's Eldrazi Obligator. Wait, what? 2 and a red for a 3/1 with haste, and if you play 1 and a colorless, you can steal one of your creature's opponents. Press him into service under your control. He gains haste, and then you're going to be attacking him with 2 creatures, getting 2 Grenzo triggers, and getting a blocker out of the way. And steal effects are where it's at. What else? Immobilizer Eldrazi. This is great. I remember this from Limited. It was sometimes really powerful. Most of the time it's 1 and a red for a 2/1, but every so often you pay 2 and a colorless and creatures with toughness greater than its power can't block this turn. Sometimes this guy will do nothing, and sometimes, well, he'll make your whole team unblockable. Those last 2 Eldrazi gave us a taste of a strategy that's very important in this deck, and that's being able to get in damage despite your opponent's blockers. Let's keep our opponent's creatures from blocking with Firefist Striker. 2 mana 2/1, Battalion. Target creature can't block this turn. Also, Frenzied Goblin. He's just a 1/1, but when you pay red, target creature can't block this turn. We got a theme going on here. Pyreheart Wolf. When Pyreheart Wolf attacks, each creature you control gets Menace. And this has Undying, so you can swing in and have this guy undie and then swing in again. You're definitely going to get in for some damage with a Pyreheart Wolf. Goblin Dark Dwellers. These guys have Menace too. And they're sweet goblins if you're going to go in a heavier goblin tribal deck. 5 mana for a 4/4 Menace, and it can cast an instant sorcery with CMC 3 or less from your graveyard. Now in the deck that I've built, I don't have Goblin Dark Dwellers in it because I don't have enough instants or sorceries. But if you're going a little bit more Goblin Tribal, or if you have things like Krenko's Command or Hordling Outburst, you should definitely consider Goblin Dark Dwellers. Goblin Heel Cutter proved himself in Limited, and he's back. Go ahead and dash him in for 3 mana and make a creature not block, and then reap the benefits of Grenzo. Or you can use a land. It's basically a free Falter ability. When Smoldering Spire enters the battlefield, target creature can't block. And it's just on a land. That's sweet. Dwarven Nomad. 3 mana, tap target creature with power 2 or less is unblockable this turn. Making a creature unblockable is pretty great. I don't know if I want to pay 3 mana for a 1/1 that can do it. We also have Break Through the Line, an enchantment for 2 that says target creature with power 2 or less gains haste and can't be blocked. Now I don't think I'm going to run either one of these. I think I just want to brute force my way through, maybe provide a little bit of evasion to get damage through. But, you know, these are definitely cards that we should consider when building the deck. Oh yeah, I want to steal my opponent's blockers with Zealous Conscripts. Actually, what I really want to do is steal my opponent's Planeswalker and ultimate it. But I will settle for stealing my opponent's blocker and getting in with 2 creatures. Or I'll just steal a creature from each opponent and Molten Primordial people. If we just want to get in for damage, Academy Raider, 3 mana for a 1/1 with Intimidate, which means he's very hard to block. And when he deals combat damage to a player, I can rummage. Alright, not very powerful, but I'll take it. I like this deals combat damage to a player ability a little bit better. Hellkite Tyrant. 4 red for 6/5. Flying Trample. That's pretty evasive. When Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. Oh, yes. Yes, I do want to gain control of Soul Rings and Gilded Lotuses and Wormcoil Engines and all the artifacts. I want to gain control of all of them. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. I think Hellkite Tyrant is supremely underplayed. Put him somewhere in some deck. You will have fun. we're going to have a lot of wimpy creatures attacking. Let's give them some weapons. The first piece of equipment I have is a human barbarian, Goad, bandit warlord. 5 and a red for a 3/3, and when he enters the battlefield, you get any equipment onto the battlefield with him. And just for added benefit, when he attacks, you get to untap it and all samurai, for all those samurai you have, and you get an additional combat phase. So Goad is going to be your tutor for these powerful equipments. Now, what equipments do we use? Now, I think that there's one piece of equipment that's super critical, and that's going to be Sword of Feast and Famine. And the most important part of this is when you get through with a creature with Sword of Feast and Famine on it, you get to untap all lands you control. It's got a lot of other abilities too. I don't care. You get to untap all of the lands you control. That gives you the advantage to reuse your mana so you can cast all of those sweet spells that you've stolen from your opponent. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of swords, and they're all really, really powerful, and feel free to include them, but Sword of Feast and Famine has the synergy you need in this deck. Another key piece of equipment is going to be Nim Deathmantle. 2 mana for an equipment that has equip 4. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, has Intimidate, and is a black zombie. I like buffing my creatures, and I certainly like Intimidate because it lets my creatures get in for damage. Let's look at the second ability. Whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 4. If you do, return that card to the battlefield and attach Nim Deathmantle to it. Alright, so it's recursion for some creatures that die. I'm going to have a lot of creatures and they're going to die. So all I got to do is invest a little bit of mana and I get them back. Nim Deathmantle sounds like an easy inclusion in this deck. But I would not be doing my due diligence unless I explained some of the sweet, sweet combos that go with Nim Deathmantle. And a card like Ashnod's Altar. Ashnod's Altar says, sack a creature, net yourself 2 colorless mana. And Nim Deathmantle gets creatures that you sacked back from the graveyard. I can see how this is going to work, especially with a lot of the creatures that we already have included in this deck that produce more creatures when they enter the battlefield. A card like Siege Gang Commander is going to pump out 3 goblins. You sacrifice one of his goblins and himself. That'll net you 4 mana. That's just enough to bring him back to the battlefield with Nim Deathmantle. Now, some people don't like the combo nature of this card, and that's fine. Don't run the combo. But it's kind of a free include, so I think I'm going to run it in my version of Grenzo. Some other people don't like Nim Deathmantle because it's a little bit of a flavor fail. You're creating black zombies, and maybe that's not in the spirit of Grenzo and what you want to be doing. Well, let's get back into the Vorthos spirit with Cloak and Dagger. 2 mana for a tribal artifact, and this is a rogue equipment. Oh my gosh, Grenzo's a rogue. So this equipment is going to equip for free, and it's going to say, gets +2/+0, and Shroud. It's going to protect him and give him a little bit more power. What about Blade of Selves? 2 mana for an equipment that has equip 4, and your equipped creature has Myriad. Myriad means that when it attacks, it creates a copy of it attacking each other opponent that you got. Well, we got a few creatures that can take advantage of that. What about a Siege Gang Commander with Blade of Selves? Suddenly you have 4 Siege Gang Commanders pumping out tons of goblins. Or you just have an evasive creature and it's hitting each opponent and you're getting tons of Grenzo triggers. Sword of the Animist. I mentioned that mana ramp is important, and this sword is going to ramp you with each attack. You want to attack, you want to ramp, this is the sword for you. Now this deck's going to have a lot more politics than you think. Grenzo's going to create a really unstable board state. You're going to force your opponents to attack with creatures that they'd rather hold back, and attack players that they might not want to attack. Let's see what other political manipulation we can include in this deck. Grenzo makes your opponent's creatures attack, but let's add a little bit of redundancy with Goblin Diplomats. Tap, each creature attacks this turn if able. If your opponents are attacking, they're certainly not blocking, and you're going to get even more Grenzo triggers. Or Fumiko the Lowblood. At the bottom she says, creatures your opponents control attack each turn if able. There's going to be a chaos of attacking creatures. Also, She has Bushido X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Well, if you're attacking with all of your creatures, well, Fumiko's going to be really hard to block. Also, Fumiko might be attacking twice because she's a samurai that's affected by Godo's ability. We found it. We found the combo. We're already goading our opponent's creatures into attacking each other, so let's make it hurt a little bit more with Bitter Feud. 4 and a red for an enchantment. Basically, you pick 2 players, and as long as they're dealing damage to each other, it's double. I think Bitter Feud is so fun. I get the exact same troll expression as Grenzo in the middle of this video. Just looking over my shoulder being like, oh yeah, I started that fight. Crown of Doom, 3 mana for an artifact, and whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now, this is not good if you have the Crown of Doom. Fortunately, you can donate it to another player by paying 2. Target player other than Crown of Doom's owner gains control of it. Oh, so you can never get the Crown of Doom back again once you give it to another player. That's pretty cool. It's just going to ship around in between your opponents. Activate this ability only during your turn. So Crown of Doom's going to put a target on someone else's head, and then they're going to have to put it on someone else. And it's just going to ship back around over and over again, taxing your opponent's mana and causing trouble for everyone except for you. I have one last political card for you. It's a little bit controversial. Homeward Path. Tap, each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. Now let me convince you of this powerful effect. You would think it wouldn't belong because we went through a lot of work to steal our opponent's creatures. We attacked with Grenzo and other creatures. We peeled the right cards off the top of their library. Heck, we even cast their creature to finally have it end up on our side of the battlefield, only to tap a land and give it back? Oh, no, no, no. But wait, there's a lot of political advantage that can occur by giving someone their creature back. Another thing to note is that this does not give back lands or artifacts or enchantments. I used to hate that, but I actually kind of like it in this situation because I don't necessarily want to give all the lands and artifacts and everything back, but giving a creature back just might give me enough political clout to get what I want. Also, this could just be used out of desperation. Imagine one player's getting out of control, so I swing at them and then tap Homeward Path to give it to my opponent so they can swing with them on the very next turn. The point is, you never have to activate Homeward Path, but the fact that it's there can give you a lot of ability to wheel and deal with your opponents. So that's it for Grenzo. What do we think? I am super excited to build this deck. I think that he might be a little bit more powerful in a Goblin tribal, but I think that this build is going to be super interesting, very political, and you know, you're going to have a red deck that actually has card advantage for once. But it's such a red way to get card advantage. It's super unpredictable because it's dependent upon what peels off the top of your opponent's deck. I love it. I love it. I can't wait to build a Grenzo deck myself. Thank you everyone for watching Jumbo Commander's Grenzo Havoc Raiser deck tech. If you like this video, consider subscribing, liking, and tell me how I'm doing in the comments. Thanks again. Bye guys.